In this video, we're going to discuss the switch statement syntax and various types of parts of it that we need to be aware of. So this is general syntax, the idea behind the switch statement. I guess we can use an example first. I'll just use this example right here. So this is a switch statement, and let's move this to our code. I'll move this out of the way and copy and paste this example so that we can talk about the possibilities using a switch statement. Once again, notice that my code doesn't look very good when I copy and paste it from one place to another. So I immediately just have this habit to saying source format, which is nice, and everything is now formatted according to the default rules of certain style that NetBeans thinks is a default style. All right, so there's this variable grade right here, and I can define it as character grade and set it equal to A. Okay. So this is an example of a switch statement. So the way this switch statement works, that it evaluates the expression right here once, and this is a character, so it's a character A. So when we use character literals with single quotes like this and so forth over here everywhere else, this is a constant encoding of the character. Basically, uppercase A encoding is 65, decimal 65. So we could write something like this and it would do exactly the same thing. Okay, so this is 65 is this, but of course to make our code more readable and maintainable, it's much easier to use character literals or literal characters with single quotes. So this is different from double quotes, which generate string objects. Single quote is just a primitive integer that character can accept as a value. So what happens in this switch statement? Because this is going to be an A, the switch statement actually does only one thing. What it does, according to the value of this, it will make one jump to the corresponding case label. So here it will just see where am I supposed to go, and of course it's an A, so it's gonna go right here. If I change it to a B, right, it's going to jump over here. And this is the only thing that the switch does. It doesn't do anything else. So there's no any sort of other hidden functionality or intelligence behind it. It's just one jump according to the initial value. If none of these values in the case labels correspond to the value right here, it will jump to the default statement. And it will, here we say this is an invalid value. So sometimes the default label could be used for something like that. However, I can change this, by the way, and put default instead. So this will just be commented out for now, and use an F grade as default, for instance. So unless we take a break from here, so every time there is a break inside the loop, what it will do, it will jump right to the ending of the switch statement. Of course, this is where the switch body begins, and this is where it ends. So every break statement takes you right to the ending of the switch statement, just like this. Okay, what else? Let me revert back to the way it was originally, and I will tell you, although the default here is the last thing to happen, so we naturally, if we happen to jump to a default, like for instance if I set it to a question mark, okay, so it's none of these, and this is supposed to print grade is invalid, I still would strongly recommend using a break statement in every case, including default. It's very important. This is a normally looking statement right now, so you just have to use the break, because if we go back to A and then change and then somehow just pretend that we forgot a break statement, if we run this code, you see that it prints, it correctly jumps to this case label, which corresponds to the current setting of grade, and it prints this message right here, but then it does not magically get out of here. It instead continues following through, ignoring this other case label. It just goes to the next case label and the next case essentially, and prints the second message. Finally, we do have a break right here. So if this can be a desired behavior, so for instance, maybe you want to print both of these, depends on your program logic. But this is the general organization of the switch statement. And when you code your switch statements, I just strongly recommend that you do this. Just be aware that in a lot of situations, you probably want to see this right at the top, but the order of this is absolutely unimportant. It doesn't have to be somehow sorted or organized in a specific way. I mean, I could cut and paste it like this. It's fine. It's still the same logic, and also the default can be located anywhere you want. You can insert it in the middle, you can put it right at the top. However, you probably just want to keep your program as readable as possible. So I think this original version is the way it should be written, with the exception that, remember, I added this break statement because I noticed that it was missing in this sample, and under normal circumstances I would want to have it regardless where this case is. Also, if we don't have a default is optional, so I'll just comment it out like this temporarily and set this to a question mark. This is not a violation if there is no default and if there is no a corresponding case label that would match this setting like I have. You see, it doesn't crash, it just doesn't do anything, because in case when what we have here, I set it to question mark, so grade is a question mark. I don't have a corresponding label, so it just jumps out of this loop. But obviously, you know, in a lot of cases you want to capture some kind of default value in this. So I'd just say this is the information that all the information that you need here. Just remember that you can use a break statement inside your switch statement. There's more information about the switch statement in this handout and in our current textbook assignments. You can read that, but to get you started, this is the idea. So there are rules, and this switch expression right here, okay, it can be any integral type. So it can be a character, it can be an integer. I mean, most of the time it's actually an integer, but it can be other type of integer. So it can be a character, as we had in our case, and it also can be a string in Java. So you can also use character, byte, and other integer objects that we can wrap around primitive data types. So these are your choices. So this is the logic as we already talked about it, and so the default label is optional, as you can see. So these are just general ideas about the switch statement, and this is an example of using an integer, and this is an example of using a string. So these cases in Java can be strings, so that's allowed. And remember, we talked about a fall-through behavior when there was a break statement taken out, which should be placed there. But Sometimes it's useful, like for instance, we designate day of week 1 and 7 to be the weekend, and 2 through 6 are the weekdays. And you see that we just basically organize our cases for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 together and 1 and 7 together, and we handle it uniformly. So you see that the switch statement can look very nicely, right? So this is probably the best organization for handling days a week. I would say this is very nicely organized and quite readable. So it looks good. And notice the break statements, of course, come at the end of some kind of work that you do in a case that does something.